Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Islam in colonial and contemporary Latin America. When Christian Spain colonized large areas of the Americas from California to the southern tip of South America in the 15th and 16th centuries, it introduced a culture which already had significant features inherited from the period when the Iberian Peninsula was dominated by Islam. In the early years of American colonization, the south of Spain, Andalusia, was still Islamic territory. It was not until 1492 that the Muslim kingdom of Granada finally succumbed to Christian forces. After 4 centuries of Islamic rule of the peninsula and the subsequent 5 centuries of its gradual Christian reconquista, Spanish culture generally had incorporated many aspects of Islamic material and popular culture. Its particular and distinctive forms of art and architecture, agriculture, technologies, and cuisine. Even today, a large proportion of words in the daily Spanish vocabulary derive from Arabic. During the Reconquista, the name Mudeja, from the Arabic Mudayari, subject who remained, was given to those Muslims who remained in Christian territory and conserved their religion, language, and customs. Particularly valued were the skills of Mudeja craftsmen involved in building and architectural decoration and in the making of fine crafts such as textiles, metalwork, and ceramics in a distinctive regional Islamic idiom to which the term Mudeja was also applied. Eventually, Christian craftsmen working alongside Muslims also acquired skills in the most esteemed of these specializations, those involved with architectural decoration, especially highly intricate woodwork used in the ceilings, artesanados, of religious and civil buildings. By the time southern Spain, Andalusia, excluding Granada, came under Christian rule in the 13th century, the Islamic Mudeja style was fully assimilated into the general Spanish aesthetic. The ruling establishment appropriated it, including prominent inscriptions in Arabic, as expressions of luxury, authority, and grandeur in its palaces, religious buildings, and public spaces. Pedro I, 1334 to 1369, for instance, even requested craftsmen who had worked on the Alhambra from Muhammad V, 1338 to 1391, Sultan of Granada, to contribute to his extensions of the formerly Muslim Alcazar of Seville, which he had made one of his royal palaces. Following the defeat of Granada, relationships between the 3 principal faiths living in the peninsula, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, became increasingly unstable. The obligatory conversion of Muslim inhabitants was instituted, those forcibly converted being called Moriscos. However, most continued to practice their faith away from the public eye. And finally, in 1609, the Inquisition decreed that all Muslims be expelled from Spain. Many Moriscos were given safe haven by their brothers in religion, the Ottomans, moving to the Balkans, Istanbul, and elsewhere in Anatolia, while others settled in North Africa and south of the Sahara. Mudeja and Moriscos were generally not permitted to immigrate across the Atlantic to the Spanish colonies. Nevertheless, the reality was that Muslims of peninsular origin were Spanish speakers and possessed many occupations and skills in demand in developing and sustaining the colonies of the New World. Many did settle there, legally and illegally. Some, for example, served as soldiers, while others were employed in agricultural endeavors requiring expert knowledge and experience, as in the development of a new silk industry in Venezuela or ranching in Argentina. In most demand, however, were those with the specialized building techniques needed to execute the ambitious civil and religious construction projects across the Spanish Americas. Although there were large numbers of Muslim slaves from West Africa in the colonies, they were generally exploited solely as instruments of raw manual labor. A colonial cultural environment thus arose in which there was much long absorbed from the Islamic world, and much that was the result of the actual presence and activities of Muslim immigrant settlers. Most obvious was the impact of architectural idioms and practices of Islamic origin on the colonial built environment. New cities were built, and Spanish religious orders founded monasteries and churches in order to preach to, teach, and control the indigenous population and serve the colonists themselves. In all the principal centres of the colonial viceroyalties, religious buildings were constructed in the 15th and 16th centuries to plans drawn up by renowned Spanish and Italian architects, but incorporating ceilings and other features of the fine Mudeca woodwork. Many buildings, religious and domestic, also use azulejos, colourful glazed tiles with Islamic motifs, and produced using Islamic technologies. They were imported from Seville initially and later made in the colonies themselves. While the Mudeca idiom became less popular in the Iberian Peninsula in the 16th century for Christian religious buildings in favour of the Renaissance manner, in the Americas both it and the Christian Gothic style, with which it was often associated, acquired new momentum in colonial architectural projects. Mudeca woodwork became popular also with indigenous inhabitants in many regions of the Americas, with whose arts there were aesthetic affinities, who incorporated it into many of their local churches, some remote from any colonial centres of authority. As a succession of new popular styles, the Baroque, Rococo, etc., emanating from Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, influenced architecture across the Americas, Mudeca forms did not vanish, but were fused with imported elements to create localized Hispano-American Mudeca modalities, unifying geographically and culturally disparate peoples through a common visual language. Across Latin America, the blank street facades of the domestic quarters of colonial settlements, interrupted by occasional ornamental portals, reflected the environment and lifestyles of the towns and villages of former Islamic Spain. The streetscapes of Lima, the capital of the Viceroyalty of Peru, had a particularly distinctive Islamic architectural flavour, with elaborate projecting wooden closed balconies, derived ultimately from the Middle Eastern musharabiyah. Secluded within, women could observe the bustle of public life outside. At the beginning of the Spanish settlement of Peru, Moriscas were brought from Spain as consorts and servants of the conquistadores. Some acquired lineage and fortune, but continued to observe strict peninsular Muslim dress requirements in public, resulting in all colonial women of Lima wearing a distinctive severe black overall attire known as tapada. The custom was to continue until well into the 19th century, until giving way to the influence of European dress styles. By the time the hegemony of Spain gave way to national independence movements throughout its colonies in the 18th and 19th centuries, variants of Hispano-American Mudeca architecture had become accepted as signature local styles, and as such became part of the architectural iconography of the new republics. This was a time also when an intense fascination was developing amongst the educated elites of Western Europe for the newfound wonders of Islamic art and architecture, particularly of the creations of the Alhambra in southern Spain. One of those captivated by the beauties of Islamic art was a young Chilean, Manuel Aldonate y Avaria, who in 1862 designed the revivalist masterpiece El Palacio Alhambra in the capital, San Diego, for Don Francisco Ignacio de Osa y Mercado, a mining magnate and aristocrat who had sent him to study and travel in Europe and Africa. Considered to be one of the joys of the Chilean architectural patrimony, the palace suffered substantial earthquake damage in 2010. King Mohammed VI of Morocco responded with assistance to restore it to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Chilean independence in 2018. Buildings and monuments evocative of classic Islamic architecture, as well as in a neo-Mudeca style, which became popular in Spain at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, were also frequently constructed in many other Latin American republics. Islam made itself felt in Latin America in a different way later in the second half of the 19th century and early 20th century, through the immigration of Muslims to Argentina and Bolivia from the Ottoman territories bordering the eastern Mediterranean. These Levantines from Syria, Lebanon and Palestine were searching for a better life away from the ethnic crises occurring in the Ottoman Empire, and as a reaction against the assumption of authority by European powers in the region after World War I. As in the early centuries of Spanish colonialism, Muslims assimilated well and productively, one of the long-term consequences being the many strong political and commercial alliances which developed between Latin America and Islamic states as the latter emerged from colonial domination in the course of the 20th century. Some 4 million Muslims now live in Latin America. The country with the largest percentage of Muslims, 13.5%, is one of the smallest in size, Suriname, while Brazil has the largest overall number of Muslims, around 1,500,000, and Argentina, approximately 1 million. In some states, particularly Mexico, Islam is generating new converts from marginalized indigenous communities. New mosques are being built across the region. The largest in Latin America is the King Fouad Islamic Cultural Center in Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires. Built in 2000 on land personally donated by President Carlos Menem, of Syrian Muslim descent, as well as a magnificent mosque, has primary and secondary schools, a madrasa and dormitory, a sports center, exhibition auditorium, apartments for 2 imams, and an underground car park. The Islamic Organization of Latin America, its most active Muslim organization, is headquartered in Argentina.